Good afternoon. I'm Richard Rellis, reporter at the Arizona Republic. There's been some developments since we last spoke in the 2020 election. I guess the biggest one is that Saturday, a few minutes before Arizona State University kicked off its football season, most outlets called the race for Joseph R. Biden. Saturday night, he spoke to supporters, and let's take a listen to what he said.
I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide, but unify, who doesn't see red states and blue states, only sees the United States. For all those of you who voted for President Trump, I understand the disappointment tonight. I've lost a couple times myself, but now let's give each other a chance.
And we'll see how that chance goes, as there's still a lot of races out there. So we'll talk a bit about the votes that are left to be counted in Maricopa County, how the statewide corporation commission race may affect energy policy in the state, the makeup of the state legislature, and some of the protests and lawsuits that have been going on over the ballot counting. But we'll open with our national political team of Yvonne Wingett Sanchez and Ron Hansen. And Yvonne, there's something. What's going on with the McSally-Kelly race?
We do not yet have a concession from Senator McSally, who is a big Trump loyalist, and I presume that she is waiting to make a public statement until after all of the votes have been counted, which has been a consistent call from not just her, but from Governor Doug Ducey. We have just learned that over the weekend, there was a conversation between Senator McSally and the governor, who, as our viewers might recall, appointed McSally to fill the vacancy of the remainder of the term left by the death of the late Senator John McCain. There was a conversation between the two of them over the weekend, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes as I say this because I want to make sure that I get it right. We do know that the governor and McSally spoke. We had a good conversation, I'm told, over the weekend, and they will respect the results of the election. Martha McSally is en route right now to Washington, D.C., where she will return to Capitol Hill. There is one vote scheduled for the evening. It's a cloture vote on a judicial nominee. And Mark Kelly is also back in D.C. He is a Democrat, former retired NASA astronaut who unseated her in Arizona's special election race. For the time being, Mark Kelly has been assigned an office in the basement, which is customary for incoming senators, and he's trying to get his sea legs. He's trying to get a feel for the building. He's back there with at least one staffer that we know of, and we'll be monitoring what that looks like. I'm sure we will be hearing something from her in the coming days. We think that there is some sort of plan afoot for her to rule out what a concession might look like. If our viewers might remember that back in 2018, when she conceded to Senator Kyrsten Sinema in the race for the state's other Senate seat, she put out a video featuring her beloved golden retriever, Boomer. Not sure what it will look like this time around, but we'll be watching for it.
And Kelly seemed also announced his transition team, kind of his first pronouncements. Is there any reading of the tea leaves and looking at that team as to how he's going to be what kind of senator he's going to be?
Sure. I mean, his team would say that this team reflects that he will be a senator for all of Arizonans, even for people who didn't vote for him. The team reflects the type of coalition that he did try to build during his year-and-a-half long race for this seat. It is co-chaired by Sharon Harper. She's a longtime business woman here in Arizona. She's a longtime friend of the McCain family. We spoke with her on Friday after we got the first preview of what the transition team would look like. And she said, his team is reflective of the same sort of team that Senator John McCain would have built, and that she was confident that he would put Arizona first, It's also co-chaired by Luis Heredia. He is the former chief of staff for Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego. He's now Gabrielle Giffords, and they're fielding a lot of requests for interviews and requests for consideration for people who want to work for him.
When you look at sort of the makeup, and again, our editors, God love them, love the idea of what is Arizona, and people talk about it too, but I know sometimes you're tasked with doing the story about what color Arizona is. Are we blue, red, or purple? And looking at our congressional races, I mean, I don't know, what do you make of how blue, purple, red Arizona is?
Yeah, I think purple is the color of choice as it relates to Arizona. Clearly, we have big swaths of blue, big swaths of red, but when it comes right down to it, it's a purple state in the truest sense of the word. Tom O'Halloran is likely to win the first district in Arizona. That's the one that covers most of northeastern Arizona down to the outskirts of Tucson. That is the only race that has not been formally called. If this holds, it would mean that all 9 of our House races will go to incumbents. That means that we would send 5 Democrats and 4 Republicans back to Washington in January in the new Congress. And when you look at it, there were a number of close races. And when you look at the Senate race, the presidential race, it all sort of speaks very loudly to the deep political division within this state. There's simply no clear-cut, path now for either party. They have to be able to appeal to the political middle, or at least find the votes to reach to that political middle.
Yeah, we just showed the Schweikert numbers. I mean, Schweikert had faced ethical allegations, or he was found guilty, right, of ethical violations. I mean, the Democratic Party thought this was a really juicy chance for a pickup for them, correct?
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing about this one in Washington and back here in Arizona as well. This race was something that Democrats nationally had eyed as an excellent pickup opportunity. David Schweikert, the House voted to find him responsible for violating 11 House ethics rules. They reprimanded him. They fined him $50,000. And this all seemed to contribute to David's difficulty in raising money throughout the cycle. He was dramatically outspent by Harold Tippernenny, the Democrat in that race, and Democrats more broadly invested in that race in a pretty significant way, north of $8 million. All that to lose by 3-4 points, depending on where this thing lands in the end. It's worth noting that this race was significantly more competitive than what we've seen in the past. Before David Schweikert was hit with ethics investigations and then the findings against him, this was a district that voted Republican to the tune of 27%. So for them to fall back to something that will be in the mid to low single digits is a sign of significant progress for Democrats. But I think that it still remains Republican turf, and it is part of that political division. One other note about the first district race is that this is a district that is largely rural, and we've seen that district drift to the right. This is a district that is perennially competitive, yes, but has a registration advantage for Democrats, and also Democrats now will have won this seat every time under this map if Tom O'Halloran is the eventual winner here. While that has all happened, the Maricopa County area of the state and other parts of the state will have drifted to the left. And that is why we kind of find ourselves where we are at this moment. Democrats like to see it whenever it's moving to the left in the Scottsdale area, but they don't really like it that much when they see rural Arizona becoming increasingly difficult for them to win.
There's an interesting story under both of your bylines about how a Biden administration will affect Arizona. We'll concentrate. I encourage people to read the story if they haven't yet. We'll concentrate on one here. Some noteworthy Arizonans who might join a Biden administration potentially.
Yeah, so one of the people who appears to be well positioned at this point would be Representative Ruben Gallego. He's in Arizona's 7th congressional district. That's the area that includes downtown Phoenix and parts of the southwestern valley. He has been a prominent national surrogate for the Biden campaign. He has been very helpful in their Hispanic outreach. He's also a member of the House Armed Services Committee and brings that kind of expertise, as well as being part of the House Natural Resources Committee that has special charge of things like Native American affairs and such. So Ruben Gallego would seem well positioned, but there are others, including Senator Jeff Flake.
Right, Jeff is mentioned, and Cindy McCain seemed an intriguing name out there as well.
Well, she's helping to lead the transition, so we don't know what sort of official role she may play beyond that. I am kind of doubtful that she would play an official role beyond the transition, but certainly she will be at the table advocating for President-elect Joe Biden to strongly consider some of these sort of like-minded Republicans who will be familiar to him given his long tenure in Washington. I'm sure that they will be looking to identify people, who could play crucial and meaningful roles, particularly on the immigration front. Biden has said that on day one, he will send an immigration bill to Congress. We don't really know specifically what that might look like, but I would expect that Cindy McCain and others, including Mr. Flake, will be advocating that he include the voices of Arizonans in any effort that he may be drafting.
Will be interesting to watch. So yeah, I would recommend readers, if you haven't seen that story, look it up. And also Yvonne's brief interview, it seemed like, with Mark Kelly. She got some comment from him as he headed off to DC. Thank you both for joining us. And let's talk about the vote count. Let's bring in Rob Odell, who's been crunching the numbers and seeing what's left out there. We can even take a live shot at Rob joining us from the counting room, which doesn't seem, at last check, as busy as it has been. Does that mean we're close to finishing, Rob?
Well, I think Maricopa is semi-close to finishing. I think that might be Wednesday. What they're counting now is harder to count ballots, what that means is people who provisional ballots, which is about half of the ballots left, which is mainly people who got early ballot and then went to the polls anyway. They need to check to make sure that you didn't vote twice. So that's one of the big ones. Another ballot that they're counting on these what are called spousal swap ballots. So if you think about it like this, you and your wife or your husband sit down at the dinner table, fill out your ballots together, and then you accidentally put them in the wrong envelopes. There's a time to cure those ballots, and you can actually have those ballots count. But there was a deadline; it already passed. But those are the ballots they're trying to count now. And those
does the county get into figuring out which spouse was at fault, or is that settled among the spouses?
No, I think that'd have to be settled among the spouses. They come to the conclusion that someone was at fault. So we have these ballots.
Like how many total do you think are outstanding statewide and in the county?
So statewide, it's about 75,000. About 38,000 of that is in Maricopa. And about half of that, or maybe a little bit more than half of that, are these provisional ballots that tend to be more Democratic. They tend to be in past elections. They've trended heavily Democratic. Maybe less in this election because sort of our voting patterns have been flipped upside down, but it's not fertile ground for Trump to pick up votes. And then in Maricopa County, Maricopa County had 38,000. So, and statewide, about half of the votes are provisionals.
And I know there was some discussion internally in our chat about like what the statutes say about recount, and it seems like we settled on 200, right? That's the magic number that would trigger an automatic recount. Yeah.
So in all races, our recount number is almost impossible to hit. And so it's the statute is kind of worded kind of clunkily, but basically it's 200 votes or if there were less votes, it can be less than 200. But for these big statewide votes, it's 200. If you remember, Martha McSally and Ron Barber got into a recount several years ago in the CD2, the congressional district around Tucson, because they had come in under that 200 number. But I mean, it's just, especially in federal elections, it's a number we almost never hit.
And yet there's still battles over the count here in court. Over the weekend, it looked like the Sharpiegate lawsuit was dismissed by request of those who had brought it. And then there's another issue where Republicans, official Republicans, I don't know if it's the state or national Republican Party that's filed against Maricopa County for not training its poll workers well and saying poll workers were inducing spoiled votes. These are very early on, right? But they need to be settled quickly before the result is questioned or canvassed.
Yeah, no, that's right. And they don't really have, like huge chances of succeeding. I mean, even if they are successful, I don't know that the difference where we are now, like 15,000 votes. When you recount, when you sue, you're basically suing over hundreds of votes usually. There was this precinct where these 100 votes shouldn't have counted these 100 votes. So it just, I mean, unless the margin comes in a lot, it's more difficult to see a path where litigation would be successful. I mean, if they end up, votes apart, yeah, then you're going to see litigation in every county to try to, cobble together those 100 votes here, 50 votes here. But that's really what at least what I've seen in Arizona when these come down and they're suing about specific ballots, it's often in the hundreds, not the thousands or the tens of thousands.
So outside of court, there's also a battle just for public opinion. There was a rally at the state capitol over the weekend, and let's take a listen to what one of the notable protesters was saying.
You need to go home, look at yourself in the mirror, and say, what are you willing to do to make sure your children do not live in communism? What are you willing to do? I can tell you right now, I'm willing to do anything. Give me liberty or give me death. Mark my words. We demand a recount in Arizona for President Trump. That's it. Bottom line. A recount for President Trump.
That was Daniel McCarthy, who did not win in his primary battle against Martha McSally in the Senate this year. But he's also leading sort of this patriot movement. And Rob, you and I spent a lot of time talking to patriots. I spent some time actually, I got frisked at Daniel McCarthy's primary night campaign event before I could cover it. The Republican Party and this patriot wing sort of have an uneasy relationship, where we never really quite grasp what the Republican Party thinks officially about this wing of its party, correct?
Yeah, I mean, what you see often is just silence about what they're doing. And you haven't seen, you had all these rallies, you haven't seen the governor come out and say, no, we're doing the count right. You just kind of see this sort of radio silence that that people can look at one of two ways. Either they're supporting it or they don't support it. But generally, you just don't see a lot of the Republican Party commenting on the actions of this group. But they do tend, in some ways, to push it around on some specific issues. So we want to know where the Republican Party stands, and we often don't hear.
Yeah, Doug Ducey has put out this morning. He put out some tweets, sort of saying we're going to wait for all the votes to be counted, but he has all of our phone numbers, and I know any of us would love to chat with him. And I guess McCarthy didn't do well. It's hard to say how much support he has among Arizona voters, but then again, he was saying those things at an official Arizona Republican Party event. And we talked to some experts who believed that the Republican Party sort of needs the energy of the Patriot wing in order to succeed. And you talked, Rob, to a bunch of Republicans who felt really afraid or not happy with the direction their party is going.
Yeah, exactly. That this fringe element is sort of pushing policy around. And just getting to the point where this group is so loud, And so, if you get on their bad side, you generally don't get off that. And so that's, I think, what affects the Republican Party is they don't want to lose this group because, in some cases, the suburbs, and women, we saw that they didn't do as well, and minorities. So if they sort of say we don't want this very Republican group, that can be problematic for them. And I think that's kind of why you see it how it is. It's just, this idea that they're out there. We're not going to be critical of them. We're not going to support them. But, in a lot of ways, that sort of silence tells it itself.
Yeah, it was that wing of the party that seemed to have chased Senator Jeff Flake from re-election, and I guess the speculation is maybe he has a role in the Biden administration, which could revive his political career. And we're back where we started at the first segment. But yeah, the interesting breakdown of how the state votes, urban versus rural, is something we're going to talk about with Andrew Oxford as we look at the legislative races, and we'll look for the stories on the recount or the official counting that's continuing coming up. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Andrew Oxford is joining us to look at what the Democratic Party in Arizona seemed giddy, or that it was sort of going to be a done deal, that they would take over one or both chambers. And Andrew, the numbers look like we have look like we're back where we started.
Pretty much, right. There was a lot of optimism because the Democrats were closer than they'd been in a while in, for example, winning the State House of Representatives. They just needed to win 2 seats, and they would have a 31-29 majority. Instead, what they ended up doing was winning a seat and losing a seat as well. And so now we're back with Republicans having a 31-29 majority in the House. Judy Schweibert really doing well out in the Glendale and Peoria area, winning a seat for them there. She's at the moment 1,200 votes or so ahead of Shauna Bullock and more than 4,000 ahead of Anthony Kern, who looks like he's going to lose his seat. But they're losing Jeray Peaton, Representative Peaton in District 4, where Joel John, the only Republican running for State House in that district, is about 3,000 votes ahead. And that's a district where I kind of got caught off guard early in the process by this kind of single shot, and a candidate who really went out there and did a lot of the legwork and was pretty successful with it. So that's the story of the House. And then in the Senate, still a very tight race out in the Paradise Valley, North Central Phoenix area, where Kate Brophy-McGee is losing by about 600 votes to Christine Marsh. And remember, they ran against each other 2 years ago, and that was a vote that came down to a couple hundred ballots. So this has been tight before. It's going to be tight again. But it looks like Republicans are going to lose a seat there, and that's the only one, taking them down to a 16-14 majority. Democrats have spent a lot of money to flip a number of other districts, and it just did not catch on.
Right, and there was a lot of money spent in the race in Chandler, right, with J.D. Messner looking to get a Senate seat, and again, that plan didn't work either.
That's right. I mean, this was 7 figures spent by Democrats. A great fundraiser down there. A.J. Cordoba was raising a lot of money for his own campaign. You had outside groups spending heavily against Messner. Republican groups had to get involved, spending a lot of money to try and back him up. And he's still. I was just looking now. Cordoba is about 6,000 votes behind. And what's interesting about that district is it's not as if Democrats don't have any hopes there. I think Mark Kelly is winning very well in that district, and of course it's there are prospects there. It just this year was not going to be the big wave year that they had hoped, that the Democrats had hoped in legislative races.
Yeah, I guess when we get down to that, when the maps start filling in and we get down to that precinct level, you kind of imagine how people filled out their ballot, like Biden, Kelly, and then maybe the Republican in their legislative race. And I don't know whether, again, we talked about this with Ron about the state being purple, as he put it, but is there an overall pattern to be seen in the legislative races so far, or are these really granular local races that don't maybe follow national trends?
I think one thing to watch is the urban-rural split, right? The seat that Democrats are losing in the House, Representative Peaton's seat representing District 4, that is a big district that goes from Yuma to the West Valley to part of Tucson. And so, it's got a bunch of different pieces to it. And I think that's a split that, who knows what that's going to look like after redistricting. But same story up north with the district that takes in Flagstaff, Sedona, Snowflake, Payson. Democrats have come very close to that, to winning a seat there in recent years, and it's just not working out that way this year. So I think watch for that urban-rural divide, but also I don't want to say that where the Democrats are winning are places that they would inevitably win, because it takes work. I'm not going to cast any doubt on that. It really took a lot of work, I know, in LD 28 for Democrats to now hold all three of those legislative seats, if that's the way the results come down. But part of it is also, yes, these are local races where that kind of very local organizing, having the party active at a very legislative district level makes a difference. And having candidates who are well known really works. Judy Schweibert, again, where they're winning, how much of that is the Democratic Party putting a lot of money in there, and how much of that is having a great candidate who's longtime educator, co-founded the community theater company. People know her, right? How much of the money is really mattering here, and how much of it is just having good candidates, having good organization on the ground, and building that over time.
Right. I mean, again, that idea of having a candidate that is well known in the community, and first-time candidates might have trouble, say, against going up someone like a J.D. Messner, who people are just used to voting for, either despite political affiliation. Yeah. And how do we think Republicans are going to deal with the fact they're in a state where their voters just passed initiatives legalizing marijuana for recreational use and raising taxes for education? You talked about in a story that ran over the weekend, sort of a different mindset, possibly. I mean, Democrats lost, but Democrats are claiming sort of maybe a philosophical victory.
Yeah, this is exactly
back in January.
Yeah, this is exactly what you can expect to hear a lot about as Democrats, particularly in the legislature, try to understand what played out this year. You're hearing a lot of these arguments that, no, they don't have majorities in the legislature, but at the same time, this election, as Representative Freese told me last week, is not a mandate for Republican policies. You still have a narrowly divided legislature, and you have voters clearly favoring some policies that a lot of Democrats have been pushing, right? Proposition 207 and 208. And, I think maybe you could say legalizing marijuana isn't necessarily just a progressive policy. It can be a bit of a libertarian policy too, right? But it's certainly something that the Republican Party opposed. And so I think you could expect to see this argument playing out among more progressive Democrats and more moderate Democrats of, how much the propositions really tell us about the kinds of policies that the Democratic caucuses in the legislature should be pursuing. If voters like Prop 207, Prop 208, does that mean Democrats in the legislature need to be pushing more of those kinds of policies? Or to the contrary, if they're falling short of winning a majority in a year where probably the best chance of them doing that in a while, does that mean that they need to really rethink what it is that the policies that they're putting forward? I think that's going to be a debate going on for quite some time. And I guess I should note, I talked about the urban-rural split a moment ago. I guess a counterpoint to a lot of the hand-wringing that there is about the urban-rural divide, Democrats becoming this, urban-suburban party and Republicans becoming an increasingly rural party. I guess one counterpoint to that is look at Prop 207. I think this is really interesting, where you have seen legalizing marijuana winning statewide, not just in urban areas, but you see it, I think, winning in all but 3 of the state's 15 counties. So, I'm sure a lot of people will be debating exactly what that means going forward as well.
Yeah, and that could be a money issue, which would bring us to Ryan Randazzo, who's joining us next. But Andrew, it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out in January. and you'll be in that room you are now, across the street from the Capitol, covering it for us, and we thank you for doing so. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We'll bring in Ryan Mendez to talk about, well, we were going to talk Just Corporation Commission and how it's affecting the clean energy race, but Andrew brought up that interesting point about the marijuana initiative passing in rural areas. Do you think that's just because that's where a lot of the marijuana is grown, or it was just a plain money issue? Oh, and unmute yourself, Ryan.
Sorry about that.
New term we've learned.
Well, I don't think that. I wasn't surprised by that. I mean, the lawmakers don't like marijuana because some of their the big heavy hitters at the Capitol are pretty vehemently opposed to marijuana, but voters do seem to like that issue. And it seems to transcend Democrats and Republicans. So, yeah, we only had a couple of the rural counties voted against it. But I think, voters have just seen this. Most counties do have at least one dispensary operating. And they're not really known for attracting a lot of crime and blight. I mean, certainly not more than, places like liquor stores that are problem areas for law enforcement. So, I just see a disconnect there between the folks at the legislature and the voters, where a lot of people do support that industry now.
The Corporation Commission, again, that race had a lot of dynamics from the early days of vote counting to the end. But you had an interesting story, we've talked about it before, about where you think this leads Arizona with clean energy, and when would we see a vote on this?
Well, and now we're sure. So last time we talked, the race hadn't been called, and now we do know that 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat are the folks who won that election. So there's a vote Friday on renewable energy, and this has really been a whipsaw. So the Friday before the election, the commission, for the first time in 14 years, passed sweeping new renewable energy requirements. Then came election day. On election night, they thought Democrats had swept and took the majority. They didn't when the final vote came out. So Democrats will still be the minority. And importantly, the Republicans are losing 1 person on the commission who supported renewable energy and replacing them with someone who does not. So it's likely that on Friday, the commission's going to vote on renewable energy requirements, and they're likely to pass because it's the new commission isn't seated yet. But it will need to come back next year to the new commission, which is going to be, again, a 3-2 Republican majority, and 3 of the Republicans have either gone on the record or actually voted against this renewable energy requirement. So the commission, they thought they had this all wrapped up. They may need to make some concessions Friday to make sure that these rules pass a final vote with the newly seated commissioners next year. I really don't know where that's going to go. Certainly the 3 folks who passed that renewable energy requirement, it's 2 Republicans and a Democrat that are on the commission now. I don't think they want to back off any further, but they've got to recognize that if they don't, that their rules are not likely to get a final vote next year.
Right, so you described the Ducey appointee, Leah Marquez Peterson, as sort of a swing vote. She voted no, but you think she could be swayed if there's some concessions?
She voted no on approximately 3 lines of text in dozens and dozens of pages of new rules. So her opposition was really over the requirement that renewable energy in particular is used to meet the carbon-free goals. So you can make carbon-free electricity by just conserving, helping consumers buy better attic insulation so they don't use as much electricity. You can make carbon-free electricity with nuclear, or you can specifically do it with solar and wind and that type of technology. And that's the one line that she seemed most opposed to. The other commissioners didn't want to back off, and so they put it to a vote, and they won on a 3-2 vote. But again, they're losing some of the supporters for this. They've replaced them with Republican Jim O'Connor, who only got on the ballot through an intense write-in campaign, and he opposes all renewable energy requirements. So he's a guaranteed no vote, as is Sitting Commissioner Justin Olson. That puts Leah in a pretty powerful position. I mean, she asked for something she didn't get it, she may well ask again, and we'll see if the other folks realize that those rules may need her help to get that final vote.
Excellent. And we know beer is legalized for recreational purposes in Arizona. The kegerator might help you on Room Raider, Ryan.
It's been incredibly supportive through this election.
Thank you for joining us, Ryan. And we'll take one last look at the national map, which is almost filled in. I mean, most all the states are called. There's just a couple, as you see, sort of with the shading, that are left to see where Biden ends up electorally in this race, which is finally reaching a close. Obviously, thank you for joining us here. And thank you for subscribing and reading our election coverage, as we will be on it not only as the votes keep counting, but obviously our reporters are looking ahead as to what policies will be in place because of the votes. And we'll be following the political scene in Arizona and nationwide in the days to come. Thank you for joining us. Have a great afternoon.